love for you to drop in the chat. Tell us a little bit of like where you are and also how you see authenticity playing a role in your workplace as we get started. Because I'm so glad, and I want to thank you again for joining Textio's LinkedIn Live event, Real Talk, How Authenticity Transforms Teams. I'm Jackye Clayton, VP of Talent Acquisition and DEIB here at Textio. And today I'm thrilled to be here with Madison Butler, a powerful voice in rethinking leadership and creating workplaces rooted in empathy and human-centered values. Our conversation today is all about how authenticity can be a catalyst for business success. And as you felt, that did not feel authentic, did it? I'm like reading. I don't know if anybody could tell if I was reading. I had all of that to say. Hi, how are you doing?
Good. How are you? And it's funny that you say that. So when I do my keynotes, I refuse to memorize or read because I always feel like I sound like a robot instead of like me. So totally heard on that.
But I do want to ask you, like, in your experience, like, what does authenticity look like? An authentic leader look like in action? I'd love to hear more about how you feel thinking about, as we think about authenticity. How can you be an authentic leader? What does that look like in practice?
So, I think to start, I think we have to define what authenticity is. I think like everything else, it's become this huge buzzword, especially on platforms like LinkedIn, where people think about it in this really warm, fluffy light, which if you follow me, I'm neither warm nor fluffy. And so when we think about authenticity, for me, at least, it is not necessarily the warm and fluffy. It is inherently the human experience. And so all of the things that you experience as a person make up your authentic self. And that's not just the fun bits. That's also the hard stuff. It is the heartbreaking stuff. It is the things that inherently impact how you show up day to day. And so for me as a leader, it means understanding that I do not have to be perfect. I do not have to walk through the world as if nothing impacts me emotionally, physically, all of that. And so, I think COVID was for me a catalyst because it was the first time that we were kind of all experiencing the same thing at the same time. And it was 100% impacting how we were showing up at work. I was Lysoling my groceries. I couldn't find toilet paper. I was scared to go outside. There were all of these things that impacted how I showed up at work. And when you think about it, we all have things like that happen to us on the individual level, right? It could be divorce. It could be a sick parent, a sick child, money issues. And you don't stop thinking about those things from 9 to 5. They impact how you show up. And so for me as a leader, it is understanding my own needs, my own boundaries, and being honest with myself about how I'm feeling so I can in turn be honest with my team about how I'm feeling. Because if I want to inspire authenticity in them, I have to be willing to do the work in myself. Otherwise, it's all lip service.
I agree with you and I appreciate that. And it kind of makes me want to ask, I want to check in. There's a lot going on. How are you feeling right now? Just about the state of work. There's been, I know you're like, yeah.
Well, one, I saw that now it takes the average person 6 months to find a job. That's atrocious. But atrocious. On the other side, we're seeing all these companies roll back their DEI initiatives. And I've always been the cynic in the room. For me, all of these FANG companies, this was never more than PR. This was never more than marketing. This was never more than someone in legal was you should do this because otherwise you're a liability. And so I'm not necessarily shocked, but it still feels bad. Someone actually posted on my post today, I cannot remember who it was, that basically all it was saying was, they're now just saying out loud, we don't want you here. And no matter how qualified you are, we're willing to shut the door. And I think we have always known that, but to have it thrown in our faces so boldly 3-5 days before, a presidency that a lot of us are dreading, I think feels pretty bad overall.
I agree with you. And you have to someone said to me, you can't keep your head down because if you wait until after a couple of weeks and you put your head up, it's going to look different. The world is going to look different. And people are looking to leaders, right? They're looking for the leadership of showing them where the authenticity looks like. And I feel like there are some difficult conversations. And I'd love, if you can, share a moment when authenticity like transformed a difficult situation on a team. If you have any examples where you thought this person really has set the example and has transformed the way that this group has been able to move forward.
So I don't know necessarily a specific situation, but something that we implemented in my own organization, which is a little bit different because it's process oriented, but I'm like a firm believer in like nothing works if we don't write it down. But we implemented a domestic violence leave of absence. And as someone who is a survivor of domestic violence, I recognize that the majority of people who can leave those situations, it has to be during the day for the majority of people because that's when people are working. And it has allowed us to have really vulnerable conversations with not only the people who work with us, but just saying those things out loud that people feel immense shame around. And so being able to be a leader that gives my team the space to step away for whatever reason. And to be fair, like you don't need to disclose to me why you need it or when you need it, whatever it is. For me, that is what good leadership looks like, is letting people let life happen, because life never happens at like the opportune moment, right? Like it all happens at once, like it hits you like a truck. And for me, that is what makes the difference. Like even when we're talking about these companies that are rolling back their DEI policies, if you never gave people the space to be human anyway, what were you doing?
Right. Right.
And so, I think more organizations would have better performers if they spent more time really dialing in on what impacts their population day to day. Because at the end of the day, none of us can be on 100% of the time. It's just not possible. But being able as a leader to say, hey, today is not my best day, I need to take the day off. That's something that I'm really open with on my team. And it's not necessarily because, I have a tummy ache, which I regularly have tummy aches. But sometimes it's just like, hey, I have a lot going on in my life, or I have a personal issue, whatever. I'm going to step away today because this will all be here tomorrow. And letting my team do the same in return. None of us I'm not solving for world peace. Like work will be here tomorrow.
Right. Well, and also, if you were really doing the work, it would be unable for you to roll back. If you were really doing the work, you wouldn't be able to roll it back because the systems have changed, the processes have been implemented, it has become a part of the culture.
And it's a business practice.
Way rolling back your whole company, right? Like
exactly.
I think the example of it was the tractor trailer company when they said they were going to pull everything back, and it started with pride and rolling those things back. And to me, it was like, but wait, these are your employees. Like you're telling your employees, like you said, they don't care about you. Like they've never cared about you. And now you're telling them directly. And so I feel like that is the piece that we have to remember, where there does need to be structure and guidance about what this looks like at organizations. So they will be unable, like, okay, lesson learned. It's not just light things. It is systemic, and you have to look at it from a systemic, in my mind, and this is just my opinion. You have to look at it from a systemic point to make sure that you're changing systems. I call it saving people from themselves. So we're putting the system. So even no matter how you feel, we're not going to create an environment where you're going to be able to take over somebody's, feeling where they can't feel authentic. It has to be a policy. But I would love to know from you, Madison, like, why do you think it's so hard for people to be authentic? And what do you suggest for people that are ready to step into their authentic selves, but maybe are afraid?
So I think there's two sides to that, right? Like I feel incredibly privileged to show up the way that I do because I work for a company that allows me to do that without shame, without detriment to my job. And I want to fully recognize like this responsibility, the onus is on organizations, because we can only show up as safe as we are. The reason we go to work every day is to pay bills, to pay our mortgages, our rent, to put food on the table. At the end of the day, would I do my job for free? No. I really love it, but I wouldn't do it for free. And at the end of the day, people have to protect their livelihood. So I think that's the first thing is A, how do you navigate in a space where you're forced to be inauthentic? And then B, when you're given the space, sometimes for a lot of companies, I think the thing that's really hard to let go of is control. And when you encourage people to be authentic, sometimes it ends up being like, well, you need to fall into that vision of authenticity I have for you. You have to be a certain kind of Black woman or a certain kind of queer person, a certain kind of Asian American. And that's not authenticity either. But then companies feel like they lose control of their population. And so for me, authenticity and the space to be authentic really has to start with leaders at the top actually figuring out what authenticity means for themselves. Because I know lots of CEOs and lots of CFOs who are just going through the motions and leading through fear because that is the only thing they know, rather than leading through vulnerability and leading through empathy. How we inspire authenticity in our populations and in our people is by being vulnerable and authentic ourselves. We cannot ask people to do something we are not doing. So for me, that's the first thing. Like if you're not working at a company where that's encouraged or safe, I'm not going to sit here and tell you to throw your job away for the sake of being authentic. I would love for that to be the case. But in a world where we just said it takes 6 months to find a job,
right?
I'm going to be the honest person in the room. That being said, when you're thinking about being authentic, it's not just about work, right? Like I think one of the hardest things is that the duality. You come to work and you are a completely different person, and that's the person that's deserving of a paycheck. That's the person that's deserving of a promotion. How do you not translate that into your real life? How do you not start toning yourself down in dating, for friends, for family? Because so much of validation in capitalism is related to how we work, how we earn our income. So for me, that's actually the key, is if you cannot be authentic at work, how do you ensure that you remain authentic in your daily life? And I am such a big believer in building community who see you and are willing to call you out when you're toning yourself down, when you're not showing up in a way that's true or real to you. And that, for me, is the most beautiful thing. Like I've said it today, like this year, for me especially, is about building community and building our own and securing our own bag and not being fully reliant on my job to identify who I am. You know, I think for a long time I was my job, and I'm learning that my job is really important to me and it's a really big part of my life, but it's not actually the authentic version of me, right? The authentic version of me is the version my family sees, the version my partner sees, the version the gym sees. But work is just a small blip, and the reason we all go to work is to sustain the more important parts of our life.
I agree with that. I feel like if you go, I'm speaking specifically like in the US, you are told what you're going to learn and you are fed from, generations of what success looks like. And so you're trying to follow the recipe for all those spaces. But organizations also want to benefit from everyone's individuality, everyone being themselves and doing those things. And so as part of it, it is recognizing in yourself what authentic means. I mean, I don't know about you. If you remember that you were like human, different from your parents, like you could have a belief system different than your friends, different than your neighborhood, and putting all those things together. That's the greatness of innovation and being able to be authentic. But it also means you're recognizing a problem to be solved in order to come with a solution to those things. And I appreciate you being the honest person in the room, because I think so many times at work people don't know, like they never address what the issue is in the first place. They aren't recognizing the problem or aren't willing to speak up. But I agree again wholeheartedly where it's like you can't sacrifice yourself in those spaces, but it's important to go through the journey and know what that means to you. How do you suggest like finding out, like if somebody's never done that, what is the first step of trying to figure out how you can still hold on to your authenticity, and what part to bring to work and what part not to?
So I think that's a lifelong journey, right? Like I'm still figuring it out. And the person you bring to work today might not be the person you bring 10 years ago. And it's probably not the person you brought 5 years ago. But for me, it is the hardest part of all of this, which is the hard conversations with yourself. Because true authenticity is not only acknowledging the good, but it's also acknowledging the bad, the ugly, the things that you've experienced, the harm you've caused. And for me, I think that's like one of the hardest things that we have to do in our human journey is acknowledging that we have been harmed, because that creates a lot of shame in a lot of us. And then on the other side, that we've caused harm, and that also creates a lot of shame in a lot of us. And so sometimes it is easier to, numb yourself with doom scrolling or with an impulsive purchase or whatever it is. Lots of us find ways to not have to think about the hard stuff. But when we think about what is the first step is having the hard conversation with yourself to acknowledge what you're actually feeling in the moment and being able to recognize that. And I think that's really hard. One of the things that I've had to do, like when I'm scrolling online, is like, am I scrolling online for hee-hees, or am I scrolling online because I'm avoiding having a conversation with myself? I'm avoiding feeling something right now. When I'm scrolling through Amazon and I'm putting things in my cart, am I trying to catch that dopamine and avoiding feeling sad right now? Or do I like need this humidifier? Probably not. So for me, that is the first step. I mean, I actually might need a humidifier after being it's very dry here. But, you know, I think, again, like a lot of companies want the warm, fuzzy parts of authenticity. They want Pride. They want Black History Month. But they don't want to talk about all of the things that impact those same communities on not only, you know, a societal level, but an individual one. There's a lot of hard stuff that you experience as a human, and that transcends your age, your title, how much you make. Life doesn't get like hunky-dory in an emotional sense simply because you made a lot of money or you're suddenly the CEO. All people experience crappy things. And you have to be willing to sit down and have those conversations with yourself. And in order to really be in tune with your authentic self, you have to be willing to feel those things. And that part is very scary.
Now, I selfishly, you know, it's funny because I followed you for a long time and saw some of your journey. Oh my God. I've like been there, and I'm like so proud of you. I need you to know that I'm so proud of you in watching and being a part of that, like you watching you grow and develop, and you people are lucky to have access to see you grow. I would love to know what moment was it for you when you were like, I can't do this anymore. I have to be me in order to be able to live in that moment. If there was one, and I'm sure there's more than one, but one that you're willing to share with us, a moment where you were like, I have to go on a different path.
Oh, yeah. So there's actually two very clear moments for me, one in my personal life, one in my professional life. You know, I mentioned earlier in this conversation that I was a victim of domestic abuse early on in my 20s. And I think a lot of us have dated people who were like generally pretty bad for us. But in my early 20s, I dated someone who was very, 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 very racist. But I had come from a world where I'm biracial. My mom is white. If you don't know this, surprise, I don't know. People are always very shocked when I tell them that. I don't know why. And I went to boarding school. I grew up in a world where everything mirrored to me as success was very white. I obviously do not look white in any capacity. No one has ever met me, assumed I was white. And so when you're young, that creates like a weird identity crisis, because everything modeled to me is white. Everything I see in the mirror is not white. And so what do? You try to lean as close to that narrative as you possibly can. And so I had a very different voice. I had a very different set of interests. I giggled a lot and flipped my hair a lot. I loved a side ponytail. Not great either. But in that, I really leaned towards the idea of like, how can I be accepted by this group of people who I'm certainly not? And so in that, I was definitely a people pleaser. And so if we fast forward to that relationship, it was very abusive, not only verbally and physically and financially, but just like all the way around. We moved across country together because that was a bad idea, but a typical sign of domestic violence is isolation. And it was like 6 weeks into being there when things just like escalated to the point that I was like, I will not leave here alive if I don't like get my shit together expeditiously. I called my mom, and my mom was like, you just moved. And I was like, I need to come home. I need to figure it out. So I waited until he was out for the night, and I literally packed up my dogs and nothing else and drove back across the country and left everything I owned in the state of Texas. So fast forward again, I had posted a video. I had been keeping like this file of if I go missing, which was like video and screenshots and like all the things that if I go missing, nobody can think I did it myself. And in that, I had this video of him like berating me and calling me the N-word and all of these things. Either way, I posted online to just as an example of like this exists out in the real world in very normal people that you think are very normal. I, unaware of how the internet worked, woke up the next day to that video having 400,000 views. And then I woke up to my mom calling me being like, they're talking about your breakup on XM radio. And then it was on BuzzFeed, and then it was on BET, and then it was on Occupy Democrats. And it was like this thing that I couldn't control. But every comment, regardless of who that comment was from, mentioned I was Black. So this thing that I had run so far from and tried to tuck away because I thought it was at the detriment to me was the only thing that people knew about me. And so I had this very public, very terribly terrible feeling public reckoning of like, I can not run away from who I actually am. And so how does it benefit me to do that if the only thing people know about me is that I'm Black? That is the first thing you know about me. I say that all the time now. Like, the first thing you know about me when I enter a room is like, I'm a Black woman first. There's no hiding that. And so that was like the first time in a personal way that I was like, okay, well, if that's the only thing people know about me, then I might as well like give up the side ponytail and like lean into who I actually am instead of making myself absolutely miserable. But fast forward a couple years, I'm now two people, right? Like, I'm the normal person of me, like in my personal life and in dating. And then at work, I'm like, hello, nice to meet you. My name's Madison. Nobody calls me Madison, not a single person. And I had this interview when I was still a recruiter, and I had this company that was like, oh my God, we're so excited to work with you. And they followed it up with a but. And the but was like, but we need you to take out your nose ring, change your hair to a natural color, control your hair, which I knew exactly what that meant as a Black woman. You have to wear a skirt or dress, and you have to wear heels. And at the time I was like, oh my God, thank you so much. Send me the offer, because we're so conditioned to be grateful when people want to work with us. But on the ride home, I was like so violently angry, because I just had this realization that how many times do we let people work with us because they want what our brains have, but they do not care about who we are. And the reason my brain has what it has is because of who I am. Like, the reason I'm good at what I do is because of who I am. And so that was like the time that I went home and I was like, how can I make sure that no one says anything to me about my hair again? I went home, changed my like tagline on LinkedIn to blue haired recruiter. And that was it. And then now we're here.
Wow. I mean, there's so much in that space, and I thank you so much for sharing that. I know you've shared it, and I know that there's people here watching that some people may have not heard that story, and still doing good work, and understanding that you are able to do good work. You are more than your hair color, you are more than your race. You have all these pieces to offer, and that's what so many people don't realize, that we may be missing out on good work because of somebody like having an archaic opinion or a patriarchal, whatever, just name it, fill in the space here, an idea that we're missing out on, and we could be solving problems or we're causing problems. And we have these opportunities to be able to do that. But I also noticed, and tell me how you see it, what I've noticed from my seat is there's so many people that get promoted. They're supposed to lead all these people and have no idea how they're supposed to do it in the first place, let alone be authentic. Like, like, how did you learn like lessons from, like, what are some things that you've learned through the ranks as you've taken various roles at work?
So I think one of the key things there too is like, we are spoon fed from a very young age that the only way to have a successful career is to manage people. Not everybody should manage people, and that's okay. Like, and I'm perfectly okay.
Like, it's okay to just be successful as an IC.
Yes. And it's completely, you're capable of it, but they want everyone to believe that for whatever reason they have to manage people, when not everybody, like, to be fair, like, cares about people. And like, to do this, to manage people, to lead teams, you actually really have to give a crap, like, about more than being an executor, about more than anything. You have to care about the well-being of your people. That's what makes a good leader. I guess when it comes to me, I feel like I have implemented thinking about who were the worst leaders I ever had, and then how can I do exactly the opposite of that? And I think there's two sides, right? Like, there are people who have been harmed, so now they want to cause harm. And then there are people who have been harmed and are like, I never want anyone to experience that ever again. And I guess that's really the side that I fall on. I've worked for several tech companies where crying was very normal and yelling was very normal. And, I've worked at 2 companies now where I got in trouble for my dog dying. So I never want to be a leader where people are talking about me in therapy. Like, I do not want to be the main topic of anyone's therapy content. And work should not be. Like, I am a firm believer that, again, we do this because we have to. We do this because capitalism requires it of us. It does not have to suck. A thing that is required that I have to do every day should not suck. And so that is how I think about leadership. Like, how can I make sure that people here, like, sometimes you don't like everything you do at work, but how can I make sure that you feel like your time here is valuable, you feel valued, and it doesn't suck? And for me, that I think is how I think about things. Like, how would I want someone to lead me? And I feel really lucky. I have a CEO who leads in a way that makes me feel seen, valued, and heard. And so I also try to emulate what that looks like to me and feels like to me, because I want my team to feel the way he makes me feel. But I recognize that there are some leaders, again, who, when you've only been led out of fear, that's the only thing you know. And so you, in turn, lead out of fear. But that, again, is because you haven't had the conversation about, here's what I've experienced and how this made me feel. Instead, you've normalized it and chalked it up to, like, this is what work feels like.
Right. Oh, can I do, like, it's like, absolutely. When you're putting those things, I'd love to know, what was like the best piece of feedback that you've ever gotten?
Ooh, the best piece of feedback I've ever actually, and it seems really not exciting, but it's like lived in my brain since he told it to me. So this is like 3 years ago, like one of my first reviews when I first joined Grav. One of the pieces of feedback that Brandon gave me was that I'm really bad at being off. Like, I'm really bad at taking PTO. And not because I don't take it, but because I take it and then I'm still actively available. And what that mirrors to my team is that if you're off, I still expect you to be on.
Mm-hmm.
And I never want anyone to feel like if they're away from work, that they're not away from work. But I recognize that I do it myself. And I think a lot of that is, as a Black woman, it constantly feels like you were up against the last best thing you did.
Right.
And you never want to feel forgotten about. And so I'm always on, because I don't want there to be a space where I feel less valuable because I'm not in the business. But all I was doing was giving that same anxiousness to my team, where they felt like if they were off, they had to check email, they had to check in with me via text, they had to say like, hey, anything you need from me. When in actuality, that's not what I wanted from them. But at the end of the day, we mirror the behavior that then happens. And for me, that was like the most important piece of feedback, not because that exact moment, but it made me think about everything I do at work, even if it's a product of my own anxiety, how that impacts my team and how they show up.
Yes, I can. And I can tell you, one time you sparked, I sent, this is, and nobody do this. I sent I need to talk to you in the morning email at like 3:00 in the morning. And that's what it said. Like, and I was like, this person is going to see. I know. I was like, I knew, like, an hour later, I was up because I was going out of town, and I see the light go on. I was like, oh my God, now they've read it. And it's like, now it's 4 a.m. So it's like, I can't call them. Now they're not sleeping. They're going to be away. Like, I was like, and I kept sending every message that I sent. I knew they weren't going to believe me. Like, everything's okay. Like, please don't worry about it. I was like, I'm just making it worse. Like, so please don't do that, everyone. Please, like, you reminded me.
I've learned to, like, so like when I'm anxious or whatever, like I'll get up and work, and I've learned, like, girl, send your emails. Nobody needs this at 3:30 in the morning. Send it at 8. even the day I had reconstructive knee surgery, and as soon as I was out, I was sending emails, and my boss was like, please go take a nap. Please go lay down. What is wrong with you? And it's just like this inherent need to feel productive. And so that is my own lesson, is like, I've had to learn that rest is productive, and my urgency, I cannot make my urgency other people's urgency. In the same way, I don't want people to make their urgency my urgency. And so learning to just like take a breath and take a moment, take a beat. Because again, all of this will be here tomorrow.
Right. And it's not it. I'm like, are you serious right now? We are talking about software. We're not talking about kidneys. I didn't need to see you in the morning. It could have waited. It could fully have waited. I will tell you, the other part is like making sure that you can receive feedback. Textio's former CEO, Kieran Snyder, I will never forget. I made a big mistake. And the mistake was like something, it was just like a PowerPoint. I used the wrong PowerPoint. We were in the conversation together, and it was messed up, and it was bad, and it just was not going to be great. So we get off the call, and Kieran saying, okay, we're going to have to talk about this, right? And I was like, I do not want to talk about it. Like, can I just receive that I made a mistake? And it was like, But then now we're falling into the trope where I'm not giving you feedback and you're not getting feedback. And I realized that how many times, especially those of us that maybe have more type A personalities, or we are in leadership, may not always get feedback because we're not willing to receive the feedback. And so it's always being open to receiving that feedback. I'm still learning how to receive the feedback. Sometimes I have to say, I'm only accepting positive feedback right now because I'm feeling very vulnerable. Only positive feedback right now. Negative feedback in an hour. Like right now, I'm feeling very sensitive. Like I need to drink a Red Bull and I'll feel better in a minute of being able to put those things together. I love that people are being active in the chat. Please feel free if you have more questions or anything else. I hate that someone had to leave before they had to leave for another call, but I'd love for people to put that in the chat if they wanted to ask questions or anything else. Sorry, it looked like you were going to say something, Maddie. Sorry.
But I was gonna say, I think that's part of authenticity, right? Like understanding what I need in the moment is part of understanding how I'm feeling. And so that's also how I am, is like, I receive feedback in particular ways. Like I do really poorly if I'm sitting and the person's standing. Like that sends me into like fight or flight. And I know that about myself and I can communicate that. One of the things that I've communicated to my CEO is, when you thumbs up my text, I think I'm getting fired.
Wow.
Just things that I know about myself. If you say K, I think I'm getting fired. And being able to acknowledge that and say it out loud is very freeing. But that also means, like, I ask my teams, like, how do you best receive feedback? When is the best time for me to deliver this feedback? Do you want to do it in person? Do you want to do it on Zoom? Do you want to do it over the phone so we're not face to face? And like, if you want to get emotional, I'm not looking at it. Like, opening that dialogue for your team is so important, because feedback is very personal. And no matter how you deliver bad feedback, like, it sucks. And people should at least have the power to think about how they want to receive that in the moment, that it best serves them to actually hear it. But that means as a leader, I also have to know how I best receive feedback, and it can't be through a thumbs up in a text.
I know. And consistency. I mean, I can't tell you, everybody at some point has said, I'm getting fired. And you'll say, what did your boss do? And it's something like you're talking about. They gave me a thumbs up, or they told me that they wanted to talk to me, but they didn't have time today. So I think I'm getting fired tomorrow. It's like putting those things together, but then also being able to be authentic of where your needs are, where your moments are, and then taking that time off if you need it, to set the example of not trying to rush through everything. I love what Angela is saying about schedule the rest time and reframing in your mind as an appointment, task, meeting, assignment, to help create the space for yourself to truly enjoy rest and recharge. Because if you can't get the information and receive the feedback, it also means you're not celebrating the wins. You're not having that authenticity of celebrating in the moment if you can't tell when you're having a good, genuine moment. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, and I totally agree with Angela, like, not on the necessarily the rest thing, but one of the things I've had to do, like, people ask me all the time, like, how do you stay motivated to work out? And like, the answer is I'm not always motivated. But I schedule it on my calendar because I would never miss a meeting with anyone else. So why would I miss a meeting with myself? And so building it into part of my routine has completely changed the way I look at it. And again, I love being at the gym, but like some days I want to take a nap, especially when I live in New England and it's 5 degrees outside. But I don't miss meetings with my boss. I don't miss meetings with my team. And so why would I miss a meeting with me? And so I guess in theory, I could also do that with like taking a nap or whatever it is, and actually scheduling it with myself so that I feel obligated to show up, because that's how I've skirted not always being super motivated to go lift heavy things.
And by the way, you motivate me, by the way. If I feel like I'm not going to go and I'm like, I'm just going to go back in bed and I'm scrolling and I'll be like, oh, well, then I better go because Maddie went. So I can go. You're going to be fine.
It's so cold right now. It's like not like the walk into the gym and the walk out of the gym is enough to motivate me to stay in my bed. It's so cold.
Right. Exactly. Well, you motivate me. And I do think nowadays too, people don't know, like people are watching like behavior. They're watching the things that are going. So we can see if you're authentic over here, but not authentic over here. How do you suggest people do those things online? Or do you suggest, like, how do you think people can show up authentically online in a safe space and still be able to keep their job and not be afraid of that? Or not?
So I think that again is a calculated risk. The way I show up online has certainly been a calculated risk. There are companies that won't work with me. And like I had a company at the end of last year who had already booked with me and then canceled on me because I am not pro-war. And I don't feel like that's a super controversial take. I think I said everybody loses in war. I will stand firmly on that ground. But that means there are companies who won't work with me, whether it be as a speaker, as a contractor, as an employee. So like being who you are comes with a lot of rejection. And so the thing I've learned for me, and again, this is a privileged take, so do with it what you will. For me, rejection always has to feel like redirection. I want the wrong people to stay away from me. Like, leave me alone. Let me protect my own peace. And so that has been a way for me protecting my own peace. I am done working for companies who are giving lip service and don't care about Black folks and don't care about queer folks. Like, I'm just like absolutely done. I'm done. And so it's okay that they don't like me. I don't want them to like me. I'd actually prefer that they avoid me. But then it means the right companies, the right people do come to me. The right people do find me. And so that is the calculated risk is, are you comfortable with rejection? Because again, if I like fast forward or rewind, like, I don't know, probably 7 years ago, I posted something on LinkedIn that was like super not controversial. It was like adults shouldn't yell at other adults at work, which again, very like low spicy take for me. But the company I was at the time, like that got back to their investors and it was a whole thing. I got pulled into the CEO's office and she was like, do you think I should be getting in trouble for this message? And I was like, what? Like, this isn't even about you. I was like, I mean, it could be, but this wasn't.
Right.
Are you feeling guilty? But it wasn't about you. And so like, you have to think about that as well. Are you willing to have what you're saying read in front of HR? I stand on what I say. I stand on business. Like I'm very comfortable with the stuff that I put out. But that doesn't have to be true of everyone. You have to find your voice that you're comfortable with. And again, like you have to measure the risk and the reward. I encourage everyone to show up in a way that feels good and it feels right. Don't pretend to be someone you're not, but don't feel like you have to bear all and for the sake of authenticity. No one has to show up the way I do or the way Jackye does. You have to show up like you, and that may look very, very different than myself or Jackye or anyone else on this conversation.
That's right. I appreciate that because I went to a class, like a webinar about how to use LinkedIn, and it was talking about giving examples of how to be personal online. And I was like, was I not supposed to do that? Like, I was like, it's so too late. Like, there's nothing I can do now, but I understand like not everybody can do all of that. Not everybody can put themselves in those spaces. And it is a calculated risk, but kind of like Sierra is saying is that, and what you mentioned, it's doing that so you can be seen. I feel like coming over to Textio, Kieran reached out and could see like this would be a good match. And I know that there are people that are looking for people who are fully being their authentic selves as part of what they're looking for and trying to add places. And I think in the world of work, those of us that work within the world of work, there's no bigger joy than putting the right people at the right place at the right time. Right.
100%.
Yeah. Because and like you said, you're going to have to be here forever. So like if you have to work in order to pay your bills. So you really have to try to take the time to figure out what that looks like. How can people find places that are authentic to work at? Like, we know they have to work. What can they look for? What's a sign?
So I think, again, that's like very personal to everyone. And so one of the things that I practice is I have, and I revisit this often, is like I have a chart that I make and it's like my need to have, cannot have, nice to have. And I really boil it down to like, here are the things I absolutely need in a workplace and here are the things I absolutely cannot have. And so like in terms of need to have, that might be that for me, it needs to be remote. I need to have a manager who is emotionally intelligent and willing to have conversations that revolve around emotion, not just logic. And I refuse to work at a place that, again, is full of racists and la-di-da. And then nice to have might be like they have guacamole in the kitchen. I don't know. And then I think about when I'm interviewing, I interview right back. We have to remember, like, companies are not the only ones in positions of power. This is your interview too. And craft the questions that you ask around the things that you require and around the boundaries you have. One of the things that I really encourage, my coaching clients to think about is like, okay, like think about your time boundaries. One of those things may be at 6 p.m. on Thursdays, I'm taking little TJ to T-ball. And I do that every Thursday at 6 p.m. and that's non-negotiable. And so one of the questions you can ask in your interview is, what happens if there is a work meeting that I'm not able to attend because it runs over my schedule? How is that dealt with? And being able to be really clear in what matters to you and your boundaries, what makes you feel safe, seen, and heard at work, isn't, again, just about the environment. Sometimes it's about the like actual facilitating of your job. And being willing to ask those questions up front, I think, is not only freeing, but it allows you to sort out red flags. And, I think every company will have their own set of red flags. You have to determine which ones are okay for you and which ones are an absolute hard stop.
I appreciate you sharing that. And it's so true. Where I'm glad you have that list. I'm going to start making a list. I'm glad you have that list, because otherwise you compromise. And sometimes it's easy to get caught up in just the routine of the interview. You practice so much and you're feeling a good vibe. And then you realize, I didn't ask a single question, or nothing the things that are important to me.
Oh, yeah. I have a perfect example of that. I had this company that they poached me forever ago. They courted me. They made me feel, very lovely. The CEO hugged me on my first day. She was so excited to see me. She posted all on LinkedIn about me. And like, she is like Austin's darling. So like that felt really big. And I realized on like 6 hours in, I had asked exactly 0 questions in my interview. And then my boss hit me with, I don't believe in science. And I was like, oh no. And I was like, oh, what have I done? And it was like a snowball. Like 3 days later, she was like, why is your whole like vibe about being Black? And I was like, where am I? What have I done? And so I learned after that, like, you can't just go on the vibes of an interview. You need to be intentional with the questions you ask, because their job in an interview is to court you. Right. They are supposed to make you feel good, especially if they want you. They're not going to tell you the good, the bad, and the ugly. They're going to tell you about the guacamole in the kitchen. They're not going to tell you that they don't believe in science. So do your research. And in that interview process, also make sure that you reach out to people who aren't in your hiring process. Reach out to past employees, current employees. Have the conversations with people who are going to give you the honest truth, because they're not trying to reach a quota based on some asinine untruth.
Right. Good call. That's funny. I'm glad you made it, because that is funny. I have questions. We'll do that in another conversation. So as we're going down, like we said, I know we're getting down to the last 5 minutes. And so I wanted to reach out and ask you, like, if there's one key takeaway that you want everyone here to remember about authenticity, what would that be?
Ooh, so, I think it is a journey, and it is very much a journey of coming home to yourself. And you are your oldest home, your first friend, your longest relationship. You have to speak to yourself and show up for yourself the way you show up and talk to others. I guarantee you, the way that you talk to yourself and the way you show up for yourself, you would never allow someone to talk to you that way. And so be kind to yourself. This work is not easy. It is not super fun or warm and fluffy. But regardless of where you are in the journey, this version of you is good enough. And as you spend time looking back and having hard conversations about the things you've experienced and the things that you've done, know that it is okay to look back and be like, ooh, at some of the stuff that you've done. But do not look back at that person with hate or shame, because they were simply doing what they could with the tools in their toolbox at the time. And you were supposed to grow and evolve, but you can't hate yourself into being a better person. And so appreciate the person you used to be and commit to the growth moving forward, but you don't have to be so angry at yourself that you refuse to move forward.
That is amazing. And you just touched me in so much when you said you're your longest relationship and your first friend. And I'm like, I never heard that before. I've never heard that before. And that is so touching of it's the longest relationship, and being able to do that and put those things together. I appreciate that you said that. And I hope people watch that. And as they go and continue to listen to the recording and putting all that together. Now, I've been watching you for a long time. We've connected for a really long time. But if people want to find you, where do they find you?
The internet. So you can search me. My name's Madison Butler. You can find me on the LinkedIn. You can also find me on TikTok till it's here or not here. I don't know. At Corporate Unicorn. And you can find me on Instagram at Madison Amelia B, but I'm a little unhinged on the Instagram. So apologies in advance.
I like it on the Instagram. And I just want to thank you for being you and sharing your authentic, self, and leading the charge and setting the example for other people to be able to do that. So
where can people find you?
Well, you can Google me. It's Jackye with a Y. It's really easy. I'm really authentic and annoying, and that's why I have yellow hair right now. But I just got a new newsletter. It's called the People Puzzle Collective. Madison has a newsletter, the Unicorn Nuggets, which is a really cute name. And so we'd love for you to follow us there, and we can continue the conversation later. So, Madison, I say Madison because it's written down. Again, not authentic. Maddie, thank you. And thank you to everyone else who joined us today. I appreciate the conversation. And I want to give Textio a shout out for sponsoring it. So if you want to try Textio, you can go to textio.com. You can reach out at hello@textio with any additional questions. But otherwise, I'm going to say thank you to everyone, and we'll be able to talk to you soon. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.